Welcome and good evening. My name is Alan Budman. I'm the Vice President for Training of FJMC. FJMC is a wonderful organization. It allows you to be part of something bigger than yourself and commune with others and have a voice in our movement, in Judaism in general, and the community at large. It is my honor to introduce past President Norm Kurtz. He is a very well-respected person at FJMC. In fact, can I spill the beans? He will be, well, I'm going to do it anyway. He will be honored at our convention this year with the President's Award. We have at least one other person on this call I see now who has already won the President's Award, Dr. Bob Braitman. It's been only handed out, I think, 8 times in our 90-year history. So this is quite an honor. I believe Jerry Agers too, right? So 2. So there'll be 3 out of the 8 or 9 on the call right now. So we're very honored to have Norm speak with us. He is not only a great leader, a great, very well-respected person, but a great explainer of Judaism. And I think you'll find this very interesting. Norm, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much, Alan. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. When I was asked to do this, this was posed as kind of a Passover 101, and I didn't think I would be able to do that, not knowing who was on the call. So I'm calling it a 101, 201, and 301, and hopefully there'll be something for everybody in about a 35, 40-minute presentation. The idea is to talk about some things that we haven't thought about before in preparing for Passover. I'll tell you what this is not. This is not going to be a discussion that is going to give gimmicks and tricks and cute ideas for a Seder, because I leave that to people like Ron Wolfson and people more creative than I am. What this is going to be is kind of a look at why we do the Passover Seder, where that tradition comes from, and what we're to take away from the Seder each and every year that we do it. So I've entitled this Passover Traditions, and I'm going to begin with a little bit of history. And where do we go to look for history? We go to Torah. And in Torah, it gives us a description in Parsha Bo of the first Seder. So to set the scene, this is the evening before the angel of death and the 10th plague. This is the evening when the Israelites are preparing for the last night before the Exodus. So just in a thumbnail sketch, we're told that on the 10th day of Nisan, we are to gather our lamb that we will be eating on the 14th day of Nisan. On the 14th day, we're to slaughter the lamb, we're to roast it, we're to eat it. The tradition says we're supposed to eat it in its entirety, no leftover for the morning, that if we have too small a family to eat the entire lamb, we're to share it with our neighbors and friends so that it becomes a communal meal. We're told that we're to celebrate this festival throughout the ages, which it's clear that we have done so. It talks then about preparing our homes for the coming of the angel of death and the 10th plague. So we dip the hyssop in the blood of the goat and we put it on the lintel and the doorposts of our homes so that the angel of death will pass over our homes. And then it says that we're to observe this not only for us, but for our descendants. So this is where it becomes kind of interesting. You would think that at this point, when Moses is talking to the Israelites, he would have said to them, so this is what's going to happen. The 10th plague is going to come. We're going to pack our wagons and we're on our way. We're going to go into the desert. We're going to go to this mountain. God is going to reveal the laws to us and we're going to go to the Holy Land. what a great time for a great speech. That's not what happens. What happens is very interesting. And I bolded it here in this selection that I'm putting on the screen. First thing that happens is Moses says to the people, when your children ask, what does this whole thing mean? You're supposed to tell them. And we know what you're supposed to tell them because it says in the Haggadah that you're supposed to say that this is the Passover sacrifice, talking about the lamb, because God passed over our houses when he smote the firstborn Egyptians, and he saved our houses. I find that very interesting because I'll explain in a minute, but I want to go on. Then we're told, well, what constitutes the first Seder besides the roasted lamb, the unleavened bread, the matzah, and the Moroir. We're told we're to eat the Moroir, the matzah, and the roasted lamb, and that made up the first Seder. And then there's some more rules about who can participate in the Seder, and it's very interesting because it says only circumcised males and of course their families can participate in the Seder. If a stranger or a foreigner wants to participate in the Seder, must be circumcised. That's what it says. So, and then it says again, and you shall explain to your son on that day, or you're to explain to your children on that day, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I went free from Egypt. So let's think about this for a minute. And it's interesting, after that clause, we have about tefillin, about the sign on your arm and the reminder between our eyes. So instead of Moses telling the people what's going to happen and declare himself this great prophet that's going to take the people out of Egypt and bring them to the promised land, he tells them, you have to teach your children what happened here. Every year, throughout the ages, you have to explain to your children why we're eating the roasted lamb, the matzah, and the Moroir. And of course, we don't eat the roasted lamb anymore because the roasted lamb was a sacrificial lamb and we don't do animal sacrifice anymore. So now we have brisket, turkey, or chicken, or fish, or whatever it is that you serve at your Seder. But how interesting it is that right here in Torah, as soon as the Israelite people are going to become a nation, because that's what this whole story is now, from this point all the way through to Devarim, we're going to become a nation and we're going to develop a faith in God. The first thing that we're told is that we have to teach. We have to teach our children, and we have to wear tefillin, and we have to continue to remind ourselves that we have to learn, that we have to remember, Zachor, and that we have to teach our children. So when you think about the Seder, what the Seder is a fulfillment of that commandment that we are teaching the future generations and those that don't know what the Exodus and what the freedom from Egypt was about. So, what was the Exodus and what was the freedom from Egypt all about? The meaning of Pesach, from slavery to freedom. When this was happening to the Israelite people, when they left Egypt, they never met God. There was much trepidation. If you remember a couple of the first stories, the few first vignettes before they get to Sinai, it's amazing that they continued on the journey in the desert. They complained about not having water twice. They complained about not having food. They thought Moses brought them out to the desert to die. They had all this fear about why did they leave Egypt? At least in Egypt, they had a roof over their head and they had food in their stomachs. Yes, they were slaves. Yes, they didn't have freedom, but it wasn't the kind of slavery that we think about in the Deep South in the 17 and 1800s in the United States. This was a different kind of slavery And they thought maybe they were better off. And they continued to remind Moses and Aaron that they're not happy in the desert. They have this God that they don't have trust in. They know the God's powerful. They witnessed the plagues, but they don't know that they can trust this God when they need anything, or when they're going to be attacked by other armies, or attacked by wild animals, or whatever the case might be. So there was a lot of trepidation, which reached kind of a head when they got to the shore of the Sea of Reeds. They get to the shore of the Sea of Reeds, which Bob Watts has this beautiful screen behind him, and no one wanted to go in the water. No one was willing to take the first step. They were afraid. They didn't know what was going to happen to them. And here they have the Egyptian army coming after them, and they face the sea, and they don't know what to do. And then we know the story, right? We know the story. Moses stretches out his arm with the staff. The water's open. We have a midrash where this first Israelite, I think his name was Datan, was willing to step in the water. The water split, and the Israelites crossed on dry land, and the Egyptians got schmeiced when they tried to cross as well. All right, so we know that story. But there's a beautiful song in Torah that really sums up what I'm trying to get at here. And I'm going to take 3 lines from that song of the sea. And it says, I will sing to Adonai mighty and majestic triumph. Who is like Adonai among all that is worshipped? Who is like you, majestic in holiness? In your love, you lead the people you redeemed. And I have queued up, and I just want to take a minute to set the stage of talking about the Seder. I have queued up from the movie from DreamWorks, The Prince of Egypt. And I just want you to listen to the words for a minute, because setting the stage, this is about having faith in God, understanding what freedom is all about, and understanding what the Israelites were going through as they were crossing the Red Sea, as they were leaving Egypt, as they were facing the wilderness, as they were being introduced to this power we call Adonai, we call God. And the song is a beautiful song, and just enjoy for, I think it's about 4 minutes.
This is When You Believe. It's, of course, a song from the film. And during the song, the Hebrew tribes are celebrating their freedom and their deliverance from bondage in Egypt.
Many nights we've prayed with no proof anyone could hear. In our hearts a hopeful song we barely understood. Now we are not afraid, although we know there's much to fear. We were moving mountains long before we knew we could. There can be miracles when you believe. Though hope is frail, it's hard to kill. Who knows what miracles you can achieve when you believe? Somehow you will. You will when you believe. In this time of fear, when prayer so often proved in vain, hope seemed like the summer of birds too swiftly thrown away. But now I'm standing here with heart so full I can't explain, seeking faith and speaking words I never thought I'd say. There can be miracles when you believe. Though hope is frail, it's hard to kill.
So that was better than listening to me sing that song. And I wanted to just set the stage now for the Passover Seder. I'm just trying to figure out how to get out of this screen, and I'm not able to do that. So trying to figure this out. And there we go. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so so that's the history of the Seder and why we're having the Seder. And so now we're going to sit down at the Seder table and think about what the message it is that we want to deliver to our children when we're presenting the Seder. So in the Haggadah, it gives us 13 steps. But the 13 steps, and I know each of you have researched this for years, doing Seders year after year after year, trying to find some creativity, trying to find some meaning in this. And we're not going to go over all the steps of the Seder because you could pick up a Haggadah and you can learn that yourselves. But what's the message that we're trying to deliver when we're doing the Seder? We have people around the Seder table, regardless of their level of education in Judaica. They want to learn. They want to learn something. They want to talk about something that's meaningful, and they want to explore and discuss and make it relevant to today based on the history of 3,500 years ago. And so we have to stay with this theme of from slavery to freedom. And so we need to focus on what does it mean to be a slave and what does it mean to be free? And those are very complex themes, both. But we have to make them relevant to all ages around our table. And so we have these different tools in Haggadah to help us with that and to work through the Haggadah in a way that these topics continue to come up. So one of the things that I find interesting about our tradition of Passover is many Jews think that Passover is one and done. We have these two Seders, and then we wait another year to talk about the Exodus. And that's not quite how our calendar is. We have three festivals in Torah. We have Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And I submit that all three festivals are about the Exodus, right? It's not too hard to figure. And the way they're set in the calendar is we have Pesach on the 15th of Nisan, 14th, 15th. And then they traveled 7 weeks to Sinai. So we wait 7 weeks for Shavuot, but we're still in the Exodus. If you take our calendar, the Hebrew calendar, and you make it in a circle, and you put Passover or the 15th of Nisan at the top of the circle, directly on the bottom of the circle would be the 15th of Tishrei. That's when Sukkot is, the 15th of Tishrei. Why is it there? I can only surmise that the rabbis didn't want us to go a whole year without thinking about the Exodus. This is the seminal event in creating the Hebrew nation, the Exodus, and what transpired during that time. Revelation, the building of the Mishkan, receiving the laws, right? That all happened during the Exodus. So they didn't want us to go an entire calendar before we think about the Exodus again. So miraculously, Sukkot is exactly half the year. And then we have Sukkot, which we teach the children. It's about the booths and it's about living, which is interesting because the Israelites didn't live in booths in the desert. They lived in tents, but that's all right. We have these booths. But the reason we have booths is because of the story that we have in Torah, in I'm not sure if it's Bo or Bashala. I'm not sure exactly which parsha, but it's right after we left Egypt. We spent 2 nights in a town called Sukkot, in really in like stables for the cattle, and they had open roofs, and a cloud, God's presence protected the Israelites when they were in the desert. This is before they crossed the Red Sea. And I submit that's why we stay in booths or in Sukkot during that festival of Sukkot. Okay? And so my point is that during the entire calendar year of festivals for us, for Jews, we are celebrating, remembering, recalling, teaching, living the Exodus. Okay? So that's the tools that we have, is we have the Seder, and we have Torah on Shavuot, and we have Sukkot with the Sukkah. And that's to remember how important it is to value freedom, to never take it for granted, and to continue to teach it to our children, and to remind it, and we remind ourselves of it every day by wearing tefillin. Because the 2 times we're told to wear tefillin in Shemot, in the book of Exodus, immediately follow the paragraph that we're to teach our children about these rights. So our responsibility during this time of recalling freedom and slavery is, and it's right in the Haggadah, to feed the hungry, social justice. And I'm not sure what break means. I must have deleted a word, but I'm sure that I was meant to put in there, break the afikomen, which reminds us that the world is not complete, that there is hunger, that there is despair, and that only after we eat our meal do we bring that afikomen back, which we eat as the dessert, and we remind ourselves that it's our responsibility to do social justice. Bob Braitman just reminded me I'm not sharing my PowerPoint, and I meant to do that. I apologize. So let's do that. Is it up now? Okay. So I'm sorry. Yeah, I was referring to it. Okay. So we're reminded during the Seder in the Haggadah that it's our responsibility as free people to do social justice. Our Seder starts out with, all who are hungry, join us. All who are in need, join us. And again, we have the symbolic breaking of the matzah before we start the telling of the story, which reminds us that there's much work to do. Also, we're told that our obligation in doing the Haggadah, in doing the Seder, is to teach the children, it's to study the lesson of the Exodus, and to sing songs of praise. So the Haggadah is kind of a complex document, or complex book. It doesn't open up and read like the story of the Exodus. And it doesn't really tell the story in a narrative. Rather, it tells the story by showing us how people studied the Haggadah. And that's what we're told to do. We're to study the Haggadah at every Seder table. Well, with children and all, that's a little difficult, but the idea was that we would have this symbolic Seder with all these different symbols on the Seder plate, which we'll get to in a minute, and that'll help educate all that are assembled. And then those that care to study were to study all night. And we even have that story in the Haggadah of the rabbis at Bnei Brak who studied so long that they fell asleep while studying, right? So, so we have the main edict of teaching the children, teaching everyone about the Exodus, and then singing songs of praise. And we have that in the Haggadah. Most of the Hallel service is in the Haggadah. Some of it is before the meal, most of it is after the meal. And the reason for that is because we are preparing for the coming of the Messiah. And we have Elijah's role in the Seder. We put out Elijah's cup. Elijah is the prophet that's supposed to herald the coming of the time of peace. So we hope that the time has come. So we put out the cup for Elijah. So we're singing songs of praise, and we are hoping that the time of no more war, no more hunger, no more peace, all the things that the prophets teach us, the prophets Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, of course, Elijah. So that, in a nutshell, is what we're to do during the Seder. So how do we do it? Well, again, the Haggadah gives us all these different steps to walk us through the evening, right? Everything from saying Kiddush to washing our hands. We dip the Corpus. We have all these different, we break the Matzah, we tell the story, right? All the different steps. And if we complete all the different steps, we will have fulfilled that obligation. So what I wanted to talk about for a couple of minutes before I open it up to discussion, is I wanted to talk about the Seder plate a little bit, because the Seder plate is kind of interesting. And most of the items on the Seder plate aren't mentioned in Torah. This is all rabbinic. This all came to us from tradition, and the tradition continues to evolve. So it's interesting how certain things that are on our Seder tables now, even our grandparents wouldn't have recognized. And certainly 100 years ago may not have recognized, because things sometimes change on what's on the Seder plate. And depending upon whether you're Masorti or Ashkenazi or Sephardi, you're going to have different foods that you're going to use for the different items that are supposed to be on the Seder plate. So the traditional Seder plate has 6 items. The one is matzah, which isn't depicted on this one, because the matzah usually stands alone, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then you have the egg, the shank bone, bitter herbs, some green, some vegetation. It's shown as parsley here, and the charosis. So let's talk about each one of those. And the English description, I took this from one of the Haggadahs that I have, and it's kind of not a great explanation on the right, so don't bother with that. But let's talk about the matzah first. So on the Seder table, you have 3 pieces of matzah, and then lots more on the table, because we eat matzah throughout the Seder and throughout the meal. So 3 pieces of matzah, if you have any kind of an assemblage, isn't going to make it. But on the Seder plate, you have 3 pieces of matzah. Why 3? Well, there's lots of explanations for why 3. And lately, the one that I like to refer to is the number 3. Why we use the number 3 so often in Judaism? Because Judaism interprets the number 3 as a showing of intent. If something happens once, it's by accident, or maybe by accident. If it happens twice, it may be a coincidence. But if it happens 3 times, it's intentional. And so when we have 3 pieces of matzah on the table, it's showing that we are intending to do the mitzvah of no leaven during the holiday, the festival of Pesach. And so we have these 3 pieces, these 3 slices of matzah. There's many other explanations for why we have 3. We take this middle piece, and that becomes symbolic by breaking the middle matzah. Some families hide it, some families, the kids hide it, and the leader has to find it, some the leader hides it, the kids have to find it, whatever the tradition is. But the point of it is that the middle matzah is broken because the world is broken, because the world is not complete. We hide them, we take the middle matzah and separate it from the Seder until after the meal. We bring this piece back. This becomes the dessert. This becomes the afikomen. This is the dessert. This is what we eat. There's no bracha that we recite for the afikomen. We just eat it. And then we recite the Birkat HaMazon. And again, I talked about it a little bit earlier, but in our family, we talk about when we bring the afikomen back, we talk about all the things that we can do to make the world a better place. And we go around the table and we talk about that. Just like on secular Thanksgiving, we'll have that same kind of conversation before the meal on what we're thankful for, but what we can do to make the world a better place. And that's what the afikomen symbolizes. The next item on the Seder plate is the Moroir. And on several plates, you'll see that there's also a place for what's called chazeret, which is also a different type of vegetable that might be bitter. The Moroir is the horseradish, right? That typically all families that I've come across, we use we use a horseradish as a bitter herb, right, for the bitterness of the slavery. But we also use a vegetable like romaine lettuce or a radish or an onion I've seen used, or some other vegetable that gets dipped in the salt water to remind us of the bitterness of the slavery as well. And it's been explained to me that the reason we have two is because we dip twice. And so to dip the Moroir twice, which we do, but to dip just the Moroir twice, you also need something to dip as the bitter herb, and so we use another vegetable, again, like romaine lettuce, or like a radish or an onion or something like that. We have the roasted bone to remind us of the lamb, right? So we have a shank bone, but I'm told that it doesn't have to be a roasted lamb. If you don't have one or you can't get one, you can also use like the drumstick of a chicken or the drumstick of a turkey, because it's also to symbolize that God freed us with his outstretched arm. Okay, so you can replace the shank bone with the outstretched arm if you can't get your hands on a shank bone. So it would work as a decent substitution, because it's still symbolic of the story of the Pesach. Again, we have the Corpus, which is like a parsley or some kind of a vegetation that shows springtime, because this is the spring holiday. This is the spring festival. This is when the pilgrims went to Jerusalem with their first fruits and to sacrifice. And so we have on our Seder plate, we'll use parsley, which nobody wants to eat. So we also have carrots and celery and all different kinds of vegetable that'll sprout in the spring that we can use. Now we dip those. I'm going to skip a little bit and skip to the salt water, which isn't technically on the Seder plate, but it's next to the Seder plate. And we have the salt water because when we dip in the salt water to symbolize the sweat and the tears of the slavery. But also we talk about in my family, the tears of the condition of the world today, because we have to make it relevant to today. And so we talk about how when we have a meal like this, we always have to remember with salt that things aren't perfect, and that we want to remember those that are less fortunate, and we want to see what we can do to improve the lives of other people. So the next item on the Seder plate really has very little to do with the Exodus, but all to do with springtime and with renewal and with freedom, because it's the egg. It's the roasted egg. And the egg is round, which shows, the continuation of life. The interesting thing about using a symbol that's round, I often talk about this when I have the opportunity, that one of the most interesting books that I read about Judaism was written by a non-Jew, a man by the name of Thomas Cahill, who wrote A Gift of the Jews. And in that book, if you surmise it to one or two sentences, it was that before the Hebrew culture came along, the Hebrew civilization, the Israelite civilization saw life as lineal. There was birth, there was life, there was death. And when the Israelite nation came along, first thing we're taught is that we have ancestors and we have descendants that we're responsible for. And we learn about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and we learn about our descendants, and we are tied to our ancestors, and we're teaching our descendants. And that was the gift to civilization that Thomas Cahill is focused on in his book, which I thought was very eye-opening. And then we have this egg on the Seder table, and it's basically telling us that same message, that life is a continuum, and that we have birth, we have life, we have death, we have mourning, we have remembering our ancestors, and we have teaching our descendants. And of course, the egg is the symbol of fertility and springtime and rebirth, and so we use the egg on the Seder table. The last item that's on the Seder table, but again, not on the Seder plate, is the wine. And wine plays a very big role in our Seder. We have 4 cups of wine. Traditionally, we're supposed to have 4 full cups of wine, because just like on Friday night, just like on Erev Shabbat, we are celebrating that our lives are full, that our purpose is well-intentioned, and that we drink with a full cup, right? Our cup runneth over. And so we have 4 cups of wine, or grape juice. And the reason for 4 that's typically given, I outlined here, that there are 4 references to what God did for us in the Exodus. And he declares that I will bring you out of Egypt. I will deliver you from bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm. I will take you to me as a people, for a people. So we have the 4 cups of wine. And then, of course, we have the cup of Elijah that I talked about. So just to conclude, and then I'm going to open it up and see if anybody has anything they'd like to add. We have some additional traditions at the Seder table that all tie into this theme that I've been discussing. We sit reclining with a pillow. That's what free men do. We spill the 10 drops of wine while reciting the 10 plagues, because we shed tears for those that suffered. We break and hide the afikomen. We have the Elijah's cup, which I'll talk about in a second. And then we sing songs, not only of the Hallel, of singing praise to God, but then we have these other songs that have been given to us through the years, Dirhu and Chagaja. And we end very nicely with Lishana Haba'a B'Yerushalayim, which is the wish of that the Messiah is going to come, and that there'll be peace on earth, and life will be good. So going back to Elijah's cup for a minute, I just wanted to share what I learned about why we open the door for Elijah. Now, I don't know if this is factual, but this is a story that was given to me, so I'll hand it down. The story goes that when the Spanish Jews and Portuguese Jews were suffering through the Inquisition, and many of them became conversos, they converted, but they converted in name only, and outside their apartments, they had to act as if they had converted, but in their apartments, they continued the tradition of Judaism, and so they would have a Passover Seder of sorts, whatever they could do. And while they were doing this in April, when it gets very warm in those countries, excuse me, they had to keep the windows closed, the shades closed, the doors closed, because there were spies. And spies were given reward for turning in conversos. So they had to do the Seder in quiet voices, as we tell the kids, inside voices. And they, again, had to do this without being detected. And they had their meal. And after the meal, they assumed that the spies left. And when the spies left, they were able to open the doors and windows to let some air in. And that was right around the time that they had the Elijah's cup. And so it became a tradition to open the door at the time for Elijah's cup. So I think that's a beautiful story. I tell it every year, again, for a celebration of freedom, that we don't have to worry living in America how we celebrate the Seder, but there are people around the world that do. And maybe opening the door for Elijah is also a reminder that we have the freedom of opening the door anytime we want during the Seder. So with that, I'm going to open it up. Alan, why don't you unmute people? And if anybody has anything they'd like to share, I would love to hear. And yeah.
Please stop your share, Norm, if you don't mind.
Oh, okay, right. Good idea.
And Harvey
Okay.
Brownstein has a question. Harvey Brownstein said, I read Thomas Cahill differently. The Jews took a circularity of seasons, floods, agriculture, etc., and created a linear history, taking civilization out of repetitive life. More of a statement than a question, but I guess he wants your comment on that.
Is he still on?
I believe.
Yeah,
so.
Harvey.
He's still
Harvey,
there.
you know, I think it's saying the same thing in a different way. I may have oversimplified it, but when you think about it, it's still talking about, so the seasons or life, that everything is circular and it's not lineal. And that when you have spring and then you have summer, winter, fall, but then you're going to come back to the next year, and it's going to recycle over and over, just like our lives recycle with our children, and we are recycling the lives of our ancestors. So maybe I oversimplified it, or maybe I read something into it, because you're right, that was a lot of his focus on the living of how they lived. But I saw it as a good comment, though. I appreciate the comment.
Well, I only read it 50 years ago, so.
Yeah, I as well.
Thank you. Bob Braitman, please.
So 2 things about Elijah's cup. One sort of little tongue in cheek. When I was a kid, we'd open the door for Elijah, and somehow the cup started to shake like Elijah was drinking it. And then I only learned years later, of course, that my father was banging the table. But it was really pretty miraculous and magical, at least for a few years. On a more serious note about Elijah, I think as many of you may know, Elijah is symbolically present at every bris. And for almost the same reason as we bring Elijah to the Seder, in that Elijah really is a symbol to us of redemption, and it's a symbol of universal hope. And so that, by evoking Elijah, it's not just, just that we're having another visitor, but we're having the visitor who symbolizes all of what we've been talking about throughout the night. It's really an extraordinary climax of the Seder. And, as I said, it's a very important ritual within a bris too. So I think there's a nice symmetry there.
Nice. Anyone else have any other thoughts or something they'd like to share? I'd like to learn too. So what are you going to be talking about at your Seder? Are you having a Seder this year in person, or are you doing it on Zoom this year? What's going on? Yeah.
We're doing ours on Zoom, and we're using something we received in an earlier seminar. We're using the Disney Haggadah, which of course is geared directly to or the children, the grandchildren level. Not ours, because ours is still very young, but we have grandnieces and nephews who are old enough to understand and appreciate that.
We have 4 fully vaccinated people who can get together. So my mother-in-law, Linda, and me, and our daughter, who's only 25, because she's works in a health center. So we're able to get together with my mother-in-law, and she's insisted she's going to use the Maxwell House Haggadah. That's a throwback, it's like she says, we've used all these other ones, a different night, all these other like hippie Haggadah, right? So we're going to use Maxwell House.
We're on Zoom.
It's interesting about Haggadot because we used to make our own when the kids were small, and now we have these new modern Haggadot. But I always keep next to me the small little Haggadah that my grandma used to use, and she had them for everybody at the table, and they were given out by the Jewish agency or the Jewish Home for Orphans, or somehow you make a donation and you got these Haggadot. And the reason I keep it at my side, not only for my own nostalgic purposes, but because it has the spilled wine from all the Seders of when I was a kid. And I want to show that to my kids and grandkids, to show them how many years, we do this, and that tradition is important.
Well, I had a funny Haggadah story, if you don't mind me telling it. Years ago, we served in Lima, Peru, and when we got to Lima, there's a Masorti synagogue there that we belong to, and we found out through that way that the head of B'nai B'rith of Peru was the father of a girl that Linda had at her house in New Jersey as an exchange student in high school. Okay. So we got to Peru in this incredible coincidence, and they weren't going to let us be alone for any of the holidays. And
Right.
his wife was a survivor of Theresienstadt. And so interesting family, but they're very challenged there in what they can get. So they had one mimeographed Haggadah that they had cobbled together in different pieces that they had made themselves. So at the Seder, we passed the Haggadah from one hand to another, but there were a lot of older people who were, whose eyesight wasn't so great. So with the Haggadah that we passed from one hand to another as people read, went a pair of reading glasses.
Interesting. Very nice.
I love that story, Norm, about your Weinstein Tagata. And, listening to that really makes me think that probably one of the most important things that we can do, particularly when we have many generations and many levels of interest and observance, is just for them to have a sense that this is something that we, the people, have been doing for many generations, and our families have, and our grandparents have, and their grandparents have. And I think even perhaps more than every word of the ritual, for them to have that sense and to leave the table with saying, I did something that my forebears have done. For them to even think of having forebears, I mean, it's a very fair society. I think that's a really nice story, and it's important.
Yeah. So when Alan publicized this particular webinar, he said, because if you have any questions, they'll be answered. So I'm sure I didn't accomplish that, but I'm curious to know if anybody came on because they had a specific question. Because if I don't know the answer, somebody else on this call may. So
I just wanted to see your face, Norm.
Oh, thanks, Harvey. I love you too.
So my Haggadah story is, every Passover, my mom would say, Harvey, can you run up to the A&P and get some
mic, Harvey. I'm
Haggadah?
having trouble hearing you.
Right. There are no A&Ps anymore. What would you do for a Haggadah?
So every year when I was a kid, my mother would say, Harvey, go up to the A&P, run up and get some Haggadahs. They were Manischewitz Haggadahs.
Right.
And you could get kosher for Passover from Maxwell House coffee. That was a big deal.
Yeah.
And we still use those agaves for the same reason. There's a poem that I want to read that Alan had the poet Jessica Greenbaum share a couple of nights ago, and this will shape our Seder. It winds up being different every year, so I'll read it. It's called River Dream. In the dream, I'm on one side of a river, and there is a woman bathing a baby in the cool water on the other side. As evening falls, she places the baby in a basket and sets it afloat to me. Even though she can't see me, she knows I'm here, waiting for the basket to arrive. Nor can I see her, but I know she has set it adrift. And I was just awestruck by this poem, because we say that history is written by the winners, and history is also in a cultural thing. We tell the Jewish story, we tell it the Jewish way. But what this poem says is that if you take a different perspective, you see things differently. And the perspective in this poem is, I guess it's Nefertiti, the Egyptian daughter who becomes Moses' mother, and her expectations and her yearnings and her seeing this from afar. And it's really an incredible poem, and it's an incredible way to look at things. And so I actually broke down and bought this Tagata on Kindle. I mean, this was a last minute purchase, but I had to have the poem. So it's hard for me to use Kindle to do anything with. I'm not that kind of person, but I throw that out at you for if you choose to use it.
Thank you, Harv.
Thanks, Harv.
Thank you,
Anybody
Alan,
else?
by the way.
I have placed on chat the link that if you would like to give a donation in honor of Norm for the wonderful job he has done, you can give such a donation to FJMC. It's on the chat, fjmc.org/donate. And we would be honored to have your donation. We will let Norm, you've made a donation, not the amount, of course, but the fact that you made one.
So before we end, I just wanted to wrap up by saying that the reason I played that song, besides the fact that it was pleasant to watch and listen to, is because that's what the lesson is that I'm going to be trying to teach my kids and grandkids this Pesach, is that, kind of like Theodore Herzl, it just popped into my head, if you will it, it's not a dream. There can be miracles if you believe. And what that means is believe is also to work towards it. You have to work, you have to believe, you have to strive, but you can make things happen and you can improve things and you can deal with life the way that it's dealt to you, and you can, and things can be better. And I think that that's the lesson about stepping into the Red Sea. Every day, Rabbi Lieben at this meditative service that a few of us attend on Sunday mornings, but Rabbi Lieben always says right before we sing the Shir Hayam, before we sing the Song of the Sea, is it's about you're setting your intention to face what's coming, to understand what life is dealing you that day, and how you're going to face the world that day and overcome the obstacles and achieve and deal with the obstacles and cope and face this. And that's what the lesson of the Song of the Sea is. It took great faith to step into that sea, even if it's metaphoric, it doesn't matter. Just to go on that journey took great faith. And that's what we're singing every day in the Bezukei Zimra, right? In the introductory service to Shachri. Every day, that's what we say. And that's what the Seder is about. And that's what the lesson is, about slavery to freedom. So thank you for joining us. And thank you for joining me. And I hope that we all have a Chag Sameach, v'kasher, a kosher and joyous Pesach holiday. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Norm.
Thank you, Norman.
Thank you so much, Norm. Thank you all for participating.
Thank
Thank you, Norm.
Okay.
Always
Pesach
very
to
fascinating
one and
as
all.
usual.
Nice
Thank
to
you.
meet you.
Pesach.
Nice to
Yes.
see you
Good night,
all.
y'all.
Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank
Norm.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Norm.